Welcome to part 4 of AASB's virtual summer law clinic webinar series. I am Shalicia Robinson, AASB's Assistant Director of Public Relations and the host of this session. Before we begin with our housekeeping items, I would like to take an opportunity to highlight one of our Platinum Sustaining members. Please take a moment to watch this brief message from Schneider Electric.
Hey y'all from the Schneider Electric team. We sure miss you at the conference this year, and we can't wait to see you in the future.
I know a lot is on everyone's minds this year, whether it's making your buildings as safe as possible for your students and staff for the upcoming school year, or possible stimulus dollars and state bond issue. I want y'all to know that whether it's the building side or the financial side, we're here to support you to bring together the best possible solutions for your school system.
And we really hope that all this is over soon so we can get back together at the next conference here in the fall and start working together to make Alabama K-12 a better place for students to learn.
Thanks, and see y'all soon.
See you soon.
Thank you, Schneider Electric, for your continued support of education in Alabama. Now I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, you may wish to disable your screensaver so your computer won't time out during the webinar. At this time, we have muted all lines. If time permits, at the end of this presentation, you can type in the chat box online to ask questions. This webinar will be recorded. Being that this is a 4-part webinar series, school board members will receive 1 hour of training credit for each webinar you complete. These hours help you fulfill state training requirements. However, to receive credit, you must email the sign-in sheet to the AASB office after this call. The deadline to submit all sign-in sheets is next Wednesday, July 1st. If you do not have a sign-in sheet, send an email to membership@alabamaschoolboards.org. All registrants have complimentary access to the webinar archives in the Law Clinic branch of School Board U. If you need help accessing the Law Clinic branch or School Board U, contact Whitney at sbu@alabamaschoolboards.org. Again, that's sbu@alabamaschoolboards.org, or call 334-277-9700. If you have any trouble during this call or while viewing the presentation, call customer service at 855-352-9002. Have the webinar ID handy, which was in the reminder email sent to you on yesterday. At the end of the session, we will have an attendance prize, but you must remain on the webinar to win, so you'll want to stick around. Now on to the webinar. Here with us today is Dave Ryan of Tuscaloosa-based Ryan Law, LLC. During today's session, Dave will discuss important considerations regarding the federal Title IX civil rights law and school athletics programs and its applications to the school environment. Now I will turn it over to Dave.
We're going to talk today about Title IX as it affects high school sports. This is a broad act. It can be complicated. So we're not going to try to turn anybody into a Title IX expert today. What we are going to do is try and give you a proactive plan to address these issues in your system and to spot potential Title IX issues. And if you think you've got a Title IX issue, then you need to consult with your attorney, tell them why you feel that way, and come up with a plan to address it. And we will give you some resources to address it proactively, so that hopefully you don't have those issues. But that's where we are. What is Title IX? So Title IX is part of the Education Amendments of 1972. It is a law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any education or program from an entity that receives federal funding. So all of the public school systems in the state of Alabama receive federal funding, so Title IX is applicable to you. Now, it is a broad act. It affects sexual assault, harassment, employment discrimination, discrimination in educational programs, all based on gender. We're only going to focus on the narrow part of Title IX that deals with its effect on high school sports. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact Title IX has had on high school sports before we begin. My wife was a high school athlete. Claire Smelser, my partner sitting here with me, she was a high school athlete. My daughter is a high school athlete. Claire's husband coaches high school girls sports at a system here in the state of Alabama. But in 1972, when this act was passed, you look at the numbers we've got on the screen, only 294,000 females were participating in sports nationwide. This is at the high school level. That number is up to 3.4 million today. Of the high school athletes in 1972, only 3.7% were females. Now that's 44%. And only 7% of females participated in athletics in 72. Now that's 43%. So it's had a tremendous impact on female sports in high school athletics, which has led to tremendous impact in our colleges and universities and even on a professional level. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. The state with the lowest participation by females in their athletic programs is Alabama. We're at 35%, which is below the national average of 43%. So we do have work to do in this state to improve participation by female athletes. And it's not the purpose of what we're going to address here today, but there are all kinds of studies out there that will show you the many benefits to students of participating in extracurricular activities and athletics, both academically, socially, and all. This is the compliance test for Title IX, and this is why I'm going to tell you, we want you to spot the issues, but we're not going to be able to turn anybody into a Title IX expert today. There are two prongs to this compliance test. And then the first prong has 3 additional prongs to it. The second prong has 8 more tests that go with it, and each of those 8 tests have multiple components. So it gets complicated quickly. This is what you need to know to start with. You have to provide equal opportunities for male and female students to participate, and they have to be treated equally with respect to benefits, services, and treatment. You also need to know that in addition to your interscholastic athletic programs, it applies to your intramural programs, if you have those, your physical education classes, or any other school-sponsored athletic events. So when we're looking to see if we've complied, what is the test? Do they have to be equal? That's the question I get all the time. They don't have to be equal. It would be almost impossible for the participation in girls and boys athletics and the treatment of girls and boys athletics to be equal, but it does have to be equitable, or what they call equal in effect. And the easiest way for me to sum up what that means to you is it's got to be fair. Okay. You look at the whole program, so you don't just look and go, well, gosh, we've got one boys athletics program that has these tremendous benefits and opportunities, so we must be out of balance. You look at all of your girls' programs and you compare them with all of your boys' programs at each of your schools. Benefits don't have to be identical. Opportunities and treatment don't have to be identical, but they have to be fair. Then you get to the money part of it. Do the budgets have to be equal? No. I mean, that's just not possible. We're going to talk about this a little bit later when we get to the treatment and benefits aspect of this, but a good example of this is the cost of outfitting a football player versus a volleyball player, because those are sports that you really don't have a comparable one for the other sex. It's going to cost you $1,000 or more to outfit a football player and all of the equipment that he needs, just the basic equipment. You can go buy the volleyball player the finest equipment they make for that sport, and you're not going to be able to spend more than a couple of $100. Is that equal? No. But is it equitable? Yes, as long as they're both receiving the same quality of uniform and equipment. So when we talk about equitable, that's what we're talking about. You can favor one sport over another. The way the Title IX refers to it is you can have a Cadillac program. So you might have a baseball program that has the best uniforms, the best equipment, the best facilities, the best of everything, and that's okay as long as you have a Cadillac Girls program. It's a pretty easy example, and since I'm in Tuscaloosa, I'll use the University of Alabama as my example. It's easy to see on a college level. Clearly, Alabama football is the men's Cadillac program, but the gymnastics program is also a Cadillac program, and softball is getting there. So it's you don't have to push down one sport to the detriment of the others if that's not what you want to do, so long as you have a comparable, quote, Cadillac sport in girls athletics as well. Okay, so this goes back to the first prong of our test. Do we have equal opportunities for male and female athletes? And there's a three-part test to determine that: substantial proportionality, history and continuing practice of program expansion, and full and effective accommodation of athletic interests and abilities. The important thing to remember here is you only have to satisfy one of those prongs. These are either ors. If you don't satisfy prong one or prong two, but you satisfy the third prong, then you have provided equal opportunities to participate in athletics to your male and female athletes. I'll let you in on another secret. As far as high school programs, almost none, and I would go as far as saying none, are going to satisfy those first two prongs, but you probably don't satisfy the third one. So substantial proportionality. Now, I just told you, you're probably not going to be able to satisfy this, so it's not, why is this important to you? What substantial proportionality means is look at the percentage of your students that are male or female. So you have 52% female students. Are 52% of your athletes female? If they are, then you pass the substantial proportionality test. Told you that you don't have to be exactly equal. You don't have to be 52% to 52%, but you got to be close. And the standard that the Office of Civil Rights uses is whether the difference would be enough to form a full team in one of your sports or not. Even though you're not going to satisfy that test, you need to make that determination when you're doing a Title IX evaluation, because you've got to determine what is the underrepresented sex. And what I mean by that is if 52% of your students are female, but only 35% of your athletes are female, then female is the underrepresented gender. Okay. That's important because the next two prongs of the opportunities test only apply to the underrepresented gender. So when you get to prong two, do you have a history and continuing practice of program expansion for the underrepresented sex? I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that the underrepresented sex for everybody listening to this phone call is females. So do you have a history and continuing practice of program expansion? That's really hard to do in high school athletics because generally most schools offer all of the sanctioned sports that the High School Athletic Association in that state affords, or at least all of them that they have people who have interest and ability to participate in. So this is, again, this is when you see college programs expanding, like at Alabama recently, they instituted a rowing program that's for females only. They're trying to satisfy this prong of Title IX. High schools, you just don't really have that opportunity. This is where high schools will more often than not satisfy the third prong of the opportunities test under Title IX. Do you accommodate the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex, which, like I said, is going to be females, through your present programs? And the way you do that, this is a list of the sports sanctioned by the High School Athletic Association in Alabama. You need to offer those as much as possible to your female athletes if there is an interest in that sport. Now, I know some school systems go, well, we don't have any females that want to play softball, or we don't have enough to form a tennis team. And that's not limited to girls. Sometimes you see schools that don't have enough male athletes interested to form one of those programs. But if you have enough interest, you need to put that team together so that they have an opportunity to participate. Separate teams. Okay. If you don't have, let's say you don't have a girls soccer team, but you have a boys soccer team. The girls have to have the opportunity to participate on the boys team, subject to the same standards as the boys. I mean, they have to try out, they have to have the ability to compete at that level, but if they do, then you have to afford them an opportunity to participate on the boys team. There is an exception in Title IX in its regulations for contact sports. And you see those listed there: boxing, wrestling, rugby, all the ice hockey teams we have here in Alabama, football, basketball, so on and so forth. You still have that exception in Title IX. I would be willing to bet you that exception is not going to last much longer. I think we've all seen females participate in football, especially as kickers, but I'm starting to see more and more females who are participating in the contact part of that sport. I have seen female wrestlers. I've seen them in Alabama and across the country, and I've seen them do very well. So I'm not sure how long you're going to be able to limit female participation in contact sports and still be able to comply with Title IX, but as of now, you can. LGBT students, and we're going to focus on transgender because that's where the open question is here. We've got a new Supreme Court case released in the last 2 weeks, Bostic versus Clayton County. You see it at the bottom, which extended employment discrimination protection to gay and transgender employees. And did so by determining the word sex in that statute applied to gay and transgender people. I have to believe, since the exact same word is used in Title IX, that it is going to be a Title IX violation to discriminate against gay or transgender high school student athletes. I don't know what that means, and I know what you're all sitting there thinking. Is a transgender student who identifies as a female but was born as a male allowed to participate on a female team? As of right now, the answer to that is no. High School Athletic Association has a policy that prohibits that, and there is actually a bill pending in front of the legislature. I don't know that it's going to get reached this session, but that would make that state law. All of the attorneys that practice in this area have been watching the Grimm case out of Pennsylvania for years. It's been up to the Supreme Court and it's back down. It's in front of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it deals with transgender students and what restroom they use. That is eventually going to get decided by the Supreme Court, and when it does, we will get guidance as to whether transgender athletes in high schools have to participate on the team of their biological team or the gender that they identify with. I will tell you, I have no idea what the Supreme Court is going to do. I will tell you that outside, when I'm at national conventions with attorneys that represent school systems outside the state of Alabama or outside of the South, there is a lot of momentum for allowing transgender athletes to participate on the team with the gender that they identify with. We'll just have to wait and see what the Supreme Court says about that. Okay. Second prong of compliance: equal benefits or equitable benefits and treatment of female and male athletes. And I told you, under prong 2, there's 8 different tests, and under each of these 8 tests, there's a number of factors that you have to consider. So it gets complicated very quickly. We're going to go through each of these 8 tests separately and cover each of them quickly, so I'm not going to read them out to you there. I will tell you, because a lot of times you'll talk to people and they'll say there's a third prong to compliance for Title IX. There is. It's not applicable to high school sports. It's scholarship funding, and it only applies to colleges, universities, and post-secondary. So we won't deal with the scholarships today, obviously. Okay. So uniforms, equipment, storage, and supplies, they have to be equitable. And again, let's go back to the football uniform. If you buy your football players the finest uniforms available, and the finest equipment available, and you buy your volleyball players whatever the top of the line volleyball equipment and uniforms are, then that's equitable. Even though you may have spent a good deal more outfitting the football player, one, because the equipment is more expensive, and two, because there's far more players on the team than there would be on a volleyball team. It's not the amount of money you spend, it's the quality of the uniform and the equipment. And when you see amount up there, we're not talking about dollar amount. We're talking, if you get your football team looking like Oregon, and they've got 7 different jerseys and 12 different pairs of pants and 4 different helmets and, you know, untold different uniform combinations, you better have the same opportunities for one of your female teams. They better have just as many different uniform combinations as your football team to be equitable. Scheduling is the next factor there. A lot of schools only have one gym, and practice time gets scarce, especially when you've got volleyball and basketball all competing for space in the gym at the same time. If you give the boys the prime practice time and make the girls practice at whatever time they have left over, then you've got an issue. Time of day you schedule your events. If you have if the boys always play in prime time and the girls always play at a time when nobody can be there to watch their games, you got an issue. If you have in-school games where the student body gets to attend, and that's only for the male team and never for the female team, then you have a Title IX issue. You preseason and postseason competitive opportunities, you see that there is the 5th factor. You know, and I'm just going to stick with basketball as the example, but if your boys team plays the maximum number of games allowed by the High School Athletic Association and participates in as many tournaments as they can and has the opportunity to go on and compete in the state playoffs if they qualify, and your girls team plays 4 or 5 games or less than what the High School Athletic Association allows, and they're not allowed to go to any in-season tournaments and don't get to participate in the playoffs even if they qualify, then you have a Title IX issue with your scheduling. Travel, you know, more applicable to colleges and universities obviously than high schools, but there is some applicability to high school sports. If you've got one team traveling by charter bus and another team on the old, you know, yellow school bus, and yet another team that is provided no transportation at all, its parents have to transport them wherever they go, needs to be that you have the boys and girls teams are treated the same. You don't want to have your male team on a charter bus and your female team showing up in minivans that a couple of mamas and daddies have gotten together collectively and transported them that way. And you run into that more with football again with anything else, because you're transporting so many kids and so much equipment, and sometimes over long distances that, you know, you feel like you have to use a charter bus to move all of that, and that's fine, but you need to have a girls team that has comparable modes of travel when they go to away games. There's going to be 2 slides on coaching, opportunity to receive coaching, and then we'll go to the next slide after this. You got to have, if you're in baseball and softball, it's going to be a huge issue for Title IX. It's always been a huge issue for Title IX, but you walk over to your baseball field and you've got a head coach and a pitching coach and a hitting coach and 4 assistants running around helping your team, and you walk up across the parking lot to the softball field and you got one head coach and no one else, there's your issue. You need to have as many assistant coaches and part-time coaches helping the girls team as you do the boys program. This gets into assignment and compensation of coaches. I'll I'll say two things about this, and for the most part, it's not really applicable to high schools, but to some of the bigger programs, especially football programs, it may be. Compensation doesn't have to be equal, but it has to be equitable, like we talked before. And when Sarah Patterson was Alabama's gymnastics coach and Nick Saban was coaching the football team, I think that was the best example of what that means to be equitable. Arguably, at that time, Alabama had the greatest football coach of all time and possibly the greatest gymnastics coach of all time. So do they have to be paid the same? No. I think Nick Saban was making about $7 million a year at that time, and Sarah Patterson was making $500,000 a year. But that is the market for those professions. So what it says about compensation is you have to pay the amount to attract coaches of comparable experience, qualifications, and expertise in their respective markets. So if it costs $7 million to get the greatest college football coach, you can spend that if you're willing to spend whatever it takes, in this case, $500,000 to get the greatest women's gymnastics coach. Got to be comparable, got to be equitable in the salary and benefits that are provided so that you can attract coaches of like ability. Here's the other thing I'm going to say about coaching, just based on observations around the state. If your head football coach wants to make a little extra money, and he's never played baseball or softball or anything comparable before, and you make him the girls' softball coach just so he can cash an extra check, and he knows nothing about it and really is not qualified for coaching that team, you're going to run into a Title IX issue, a big one. Locker rooms, practice, and competitive facilities. This is a huge area of liability for high schools in Title IX, especially as it deals with baseball and softball and basketball. Everybody's got a booster club that is active and organized and energetic, and we'll talk a little bit about booster clubs in a moment, because that is one of the bigger issues in Title IX in the state. But if you've got one booster club who's turned your facility, your baseball field, into something that would rival Yankee Stadium, and your girls' softball field looks like a good breeze would blow the dugouts down, you've got a Title IX issue. So, and if you've got 4 girls teams sharing your auxiliary gym while your boys basketball team is practicing in the competition gym or playing in the competition gym, if the boys' locker room looks like a professional facility and the girls are hanging their clothes on a nail stuck in the wall, those are issues. Those are Title IX issues that you're going to see with respect to locker rooms and practice and competitive facilities. Next factor is medical training and training facilities. Medical is more of a college issue. If you do have, I know a lot of schools do have trainers that come to their games. If you have trainers for the male athletes, you need to have trainers there for the female athletes. We run into more issues in high school with weight training facilities and conditioning. If you've got a huge weight room for the boys with all the state-of-the-art equipment, you need to have the same thing for the girls, or they need to be given equal access to the one that the boys are using. Publicity. If you got programs for your football team, make programs for one of your girls' teams. I see posters of teams out now with schedules on them. You'll see them in businesses. Make sure if you're doing those for your boys' team, make sure you're doing them for your girls' team. The place that a lot of people don't think about with publicity, where we run into issues at the high school level, is cheerleaders and pep bands, and that is one of the things that the Office of Civil Rights will look at with respect to this factor, publicity. Is your band only playing at your football games? Are the cheerleaders only at the male athletes games? Are they also there cheering for your girls teams when they compete? And so you gotta have an eye on that. If the cheerleaders are there for the football games and the boys basketball games, and need to be there for the girls basketball games and maybe the volleyball game as well. And maybe put a pep band together to play at the volleyball game to stay in balance on the publicity component. Okay, we're going to take some time to talk about booster clubs because this is where you get in your biggest trouble. And I'll tell a story on myself so that you can understand where I'm coming from. 10 years ago, when I first started looking into Title IX because I messed this up so badly, the boys baseball booster program for one of our schools came to a board meeting and said, hey, we want to install stadium seating at the baseball facility. And one of our board members, who was an attorney, said, well, wait a minute, I think that might be a Title IX violation if we're not doing the same thing at the girls' softball facility. And I was like, no, that can't be because this is not public money. This is, their booster club is raising the money and performing all the labor. So no, that's not a Title IX violation. I could not have been more wrong. Private donations, private contributions, private labor, whatever it does, wherever it comes from, the Office of Civil Rights will consider all sources of revenue in determining your Title IX compliance. So if a booster club has, and I'll use baseball and softball as the example because that's the easiest place to get out of balance on this, and the hardest issue to deal with. But if you've got a booster club who's raised money and built an indoor practice facility, installed stadium seating, improved your field so that it's beautiful. And some of this is not just money raised, but I mean people out there putting their own sweat and labor behind these activities. And your softball field or one of your other girls' programs just is not able to have the same type of facilities, then it is your obligation as a school board to expend public money to bring the girls' facilities up equal to the boys' facilities. And if you get too far out of whack as far as the balance between the programs, federal courts have ordered programs shut down, and by that I mean told you're not playing at your field. You go play somewhere else, but you're not going to use your $30,000 scoreboard or your $100,000 indoor hitting facility or all of these other things that the school system does not have the money to provide for the girls program. And if you're not keeping an eye on your booster clubs and private donations and private labor contributions, you may find yourself way out of whack from a Title IX compliance standpoint and with no money budgeted to equalize the two programs. And it's a hard issue because when you sit down with somebody with your booster club and say, hey, you can't do this, or if you're going to do it, somebody's got to come over here and do something comparable for the girls program. How do you tell somebody, hey, we don't want you raising so much money. We don't want you working so hard out there at our fields. We don't want you to make our facilities so nice. It's a difficult issue, and the school systems I represent have had to deal with it. I know that other school systems around the state have had to deal with it, and I also know that school systems that didn't deal with it timely have had to defend lawsuits and expend large sums of money to defend what the issue that their booster club got them into. So how do you control them? So here's some suggestions from the Office of Civil Rights. Dissolve sport-specific booster clubs. And so what they suggest is you have one booster club for the entire school. They raise whatever funds they raise, and then the school system controls how those funds are allocated so as to make sure that they are allocated fairly between the boys programs and the girls programs. Now we all know what issue you're going to run into there. You're going to have booster clubs that do absolutely nothing and have their hand out continually, and booster clubs that do all the work who are going to be funding sports that their kids don't participate in or that they're not a part of. So, but that's one of OCR's suggestions, and in some schools it works. Another suggestion is to pair booster clubs by sport: boys and girls basketball, baseball, softball. Again, you'll run into the same issue that some booster clubs are just going to be able to raise more money and willing to do more work than others. 3, you can go to your booster clubs who for the underrepresented gender and try to give them guidance and training on fundraising techniques, encourage them to get out and do some fundraising. Some booster clubs just absolutely do nothing at all. 4, you know, if you provide a certain amount of public funds for athletics throughout your system, maybe you just say, all right, if such and such booster club is going to raise X number of dollars more than the girls program, we're just going to use the public funds. We're going to give the public funds to the girls program and not give them to the boys program. 5 is to take over control of booster club spending so that you're able to make sure that it's used equitably between the boys and girls program. 6, and this is a last resort, but in certain circumstances, you're going to have to reject donations outright. I do remember a case where a donor showed up and offered $200,000 to improve the boys' baseball field. The school system did not have funding to do comparable improvements to the girls' softball program. Asked if he would split the gift between the two. He refused, gave other alternatives, other ways that his gift could be used and still be equitable between the boys and girls programs. He rejected all those opportunities, and eventually they just had to walk away from a $200,000 gift. Now, no one wants to do that, but in the end, when you consider the consequences of Title IX violations, they probably saved money. So that's next. What are the consequences of non-compliance? Loss of federal funding. Now that's extreme. I've seen that happen once, and I think it was in Michigan, if I remember right, where the system just absolutely refused to come into compliance with Title IX. But turn to your superintendent and ask them how much federal funds your system receives and see if they're willing to put that at risk. 2 is injunctive relief, where the court will come in and tell you you're not allowed to use those facilities that have put you out of balance, out of compliance from a Title IX standpoint. 3 is monetary damages. You may have to pay damages to your female athletes if suit is filed. And if you willfully non-complied, you'll have to pay punitive damages on top of any actual monetary damages that they may be entitled to. You can also be ordered to bring your facilities up to your female athletes' facilities up to the standard that's set for your male athletes, regardless of what that may cost you. And if suit is filed and if the plaintiff is successful, your school system will be responsible for their attorney fees as well. So you see very quickly how expensive this can get, and add to that the time of your system employees and staff in having to defend these lawsuits. Sorry. So plan of action. How do you address these things? There are consultants, Title IX consultants, all over the country. I have one that I work with that was recommended to me by the University of Alabama. Does an excellent job. If anybody wants to contact me later or contact me through your school board attorney, I'll be glad to give their information. There are others out there. And to some extent, you can do this internally with the help of your attorney. Step 1, if you don't have a Title IX coordinator, get one and make sure that person's name, identity as the Title IX coordinator, and their contact information is disseminated to all of your students and parents. Put it in your handbook, put it on your webpage, put it anywhere you can. But you are required by law to have a Title IX coordinator for your system. And that's just not for athletic issues, that's for all of the Title IX issues that we talked about earlier. Number 2, you need to review and update all of your policies to make sure you don't have policies that are discriminatory or that would allow you to get out of balance between your two programs. Number 3, you need to self-evaluate either through your athletic directors in conjunction with your Title IX coordinator, or by hiring an outside consultant who will go through your athletic programs and look at all of the factors that we have just discussed and identify areas where maybe you need to improve or where you're a little out of balance, and take steps to alleviate those issues. And that's really moves into the third step, a plan to remedy any inequalities. So once you identify you've got some issues, and sometimes you'll find, hey, our boys team is traveling on a charter bus and our girls team is traveling on a yellow bus, or our boys team gets a pregame meal and then a postgame meal provided by the Booster Club, and our girls team doesn't get any of that. Or you've got a facilities issue, or the girls don't have access to a weight training or conditioning room. You got to identify those issues and then develop a plan to remedy them and implement that plan. An outside consultant can be a big help with that, but it can be done, especially in a smaller system, with your AD working in conjunction with your Title IX coordinator. And then you'll see over here in the far right in bold, you have to get control of your booster clubs. They don't they're doing the hard work and they want to see the reward for the hard work, and it makes no sense to them, and I'm not going to argue that it does, for you to come in there and tell them that you can't improve our facility at your cost, and they get mad about that. Remember that I started with the story of 10 years ago when I had to tell the Baseball Boosters Club that they could not install stadium seating at the high school because it would have been a Title IX violation. I had children on the baseball team at that time, and I was the most unpopular person at every game we had for that year and many years to come. They weren't happy about it. 2 years ago, I get a call from, as I'm driving home from work, and I'm driving right by this high school, and I get a call from a concerned citizen who threatens to sue us every time the sun comes up, and he tells me that stadium seating is being installed at the boys' baseball facility, and we better have some ready to go on the girls' softball facility. And I assured him that was not the case, that they would not be putting stadium seating up at the boys' baseball facility. That had been made very clear years ago. And then I drove by the boys' baseball facility, and there were the beginnings of stadium seats being installed. So we called and left messages for the Booster Club. Don't know what you're doing, but stop. And that was a Friday. The next day, it rained, Noah's Ark rain, all day. We had 2 or 3 different tornado warnings, I think. Just a miserable day. And in the middle of that, the Booster Club went out and installed 48 more stadium seats, bolting them into the concrete, because they knew come Monday they were going to be stopped. And I figured if they could get them down before anything was done, we wouldn't make them take them up. And that left the school system having to do a complete Title IX review for the entire school system, and then coming up with plans to remedy all the deficits we identified, and no one was happy when we finished all of that. So telling you to control the booster clubs is one thing, finding the ability to do it is another completely. Okay, so that is, as quickly as I can make it, a plan to identify your Title IX issues and address them as best you can. They are complicated. You are going to have to work with your Title IX coordinator, with your athletic directors, and with your school board attorneys, but it can be done. So we'll open it up for questions now.
Thank you so much, Dave, for that great presentation. We do have a couple questions. I'll go ahead and read out the first one. It says, what do we do if a donor wants to purchase sneakers for boys' basketball team, but not for the girls' team?
Well, and that's a good bit of what we were talking about earlier. either the school system will have to come up. I think first thing I would do is I'd go to the girls team, to the girls booster club, and say, hey, this is what the boys are doing. Do y'all want to do something similar? Can you raise the money? And if they say no, or we can't raise the money, then I look for some other donor. And if I still can't come up with one, before I go expend public funds, I might look for, okay, what would the girls want that might be equivalent? And could they raise the money for that? So they say, well, we don't want those shoes, but what we do want instead is, a second road jersey or an alternate jersey to wear on certain days, a pink jersey to wear during Breast Cancer Awareness Month or something of that nature. And if it looks like it would be equitable and they can raise the money for that, then do that. Your last two options, you either have to come up with public funds to match what the boys program donor has offered, or you have to reject that donation.
Thank you, Dave. The next question says, is it a violation of Title IX to prohibit a pregnant basketball player from practicing or playing if her doctor says it's okay, although the boyfriend basketball player is allowed to play?
That question is probably more complicated than I should be answering off the snap, but I'm going to say, yeah, I think that is a violation. If there is not a medical reason to prohibit that student from playing, if the only reason for prohibiting that student from playing is someone's upset with the fact that she's pregnant as a teenager, and especially if you're allowing the male student who impregnated her to continue to play, then I would think that is a Title IX violation. But that's probably an oversimplification of that issue. Probably need to get a little more facts and do a little more research before. I wouldn't take that answer to the bank. I'd go consult with your local school system attorney and let him dig deeper into it. But off the top of my head, it certainly looks like it could be a Title IX violation.
Okay, the next person, they said that their school system put in a turf field which serves football and soccer for girls and boys, and it is used mostly for the boys. She says any potential problem since likely used more for boys than the girls.
So if you say used more for the boys and the girls, in the sense that the boys use it, the football program and the soccer program, where it's only the girls' soccer program, I don't see that as a Title IX issue. Now, if what you're saying is the boys' football program uses it, and then the boys' soccer program uses it, and then if there's any time left over, they let the girls' soccer team come out and use it, that is probably a Title IX issue. If there were other female teams that used that type of field for whatever sport they participate in, they would need to have access to it as well. But let's flip it around. If you go build a great competition gym, and it's used for volleyball, boys and girls basketball, even though it covers two girls sports and only one boys, that's probably still equitable, even though the boys wouldn't be the underrepresented sport. So the fact that both the football and the soccer team use it doesn't bother me. If the girls' soccer team is given minimal opportunity to use it, or not at the same frequency as the boys' soccer team, then that would give me pause.
Okay, well, I think that may have been our last question. Again, we want to thank Dave for being here with us. And what we'll do now is we'll go into our attendance prize. And our attendance prize winner is Miss Vera Eads from Bessemer City. So congratulations to her. Vera, you have won a custom AASB leather writing pad, and we hope that you will enjoy that. We'll get that in the mail to you this afternoon. Before we go, I want to thank Dave again for being with us today. I also want to thank all of you for participating in AASB's 4-part virtual law clinic. We hope you found the entire series to be useful. Join us July 9th for our next webinar entitled Supporting Student Mental Health During COVID-19. We hope you will join us. Stay safe and have a great afternoon.